Ezra Granger stood at the window, watching the dust cloud grow on the horizon as the stagecoach approached. His calloused fingers drummed against the weathered sill, a nervous habit he'd developed since becoming sole guardian to his 5 young children. April 1876 had brought nothing but hardship to Pinos Altos, New Mexico Territory until today. "Pa, Pa, the stage is coming." 7-year-old Samuel tugged at his father's worn denim pants, excitement dancing in eyes that mirrored his late mother's. "I see it, son." Ezra ruffled the boy's sandy hair, adjusting the gun belt at his hip more out of habit than necessity. At 32, he'd worn the badge of sheriff for nearly 8 years, but no duty weighed heavier than raising 5 children alone in this mining town nestled in the mountains. Behind him, chaos erupted as the other children scrambled to position themselves. 10-year-old Margaret, the eldest and most serious, herded her younger siblings into some semblance of order. 8-year-old Thomas clutched his wooden horse, while 5-year-old twins Lucy and Levy competed for space at the window. "Remember your manners," Ezra reminded them, straightening his vest. "Miss Winters is coming all the way from Boston to be your teacher. We aim to make her feel welcome." Truth be told, Pinos Altos desperately needed a schoolteacher. The mining boom had brought families, and those families brought children who needed education. When the territorial governor had mentioned a program sending Eastern teachers westward, Ezra had immediately volunteered the town. What he hadn't expected was the whispers that followed. Miss Winnie Winters, scandalous daughter of a prominent Boston family, sent west in disgrace. The telegram had been brief. She was qualified, available immediately, and willing to travel to their remote location. The town council had accepted with reservations. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before the town's only hotel, dust billowing around the weary horses. The driver, old Ben Franklin, hopped down with surprising agility for his 60 years. "Sheriff Granger," Ben called, tipping his hat. "Got your teacher here, safe and sound, though I reckon she ain't what you were expecting." Ezra stepped onto the boardwalk, children fanning out behind him like a small, curious army. "Miss Winters is welcome however she comes." The coach door swung open, and a delicate gloved hand emerged, followed by a woman who took Ezra's breath away not for her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, but for the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her despite her obvious exhaustion. Winnie Winters couldn't have been more than 25, with copper-red hair pinned severely beneath a modest traveling hat. Her green traveling dress, though fine in quality, showed the wear of long journey. But it was her eyes that captured Ezra, deep blue, and filled with a wariness that suggested she'd faced more hardship than any young woman should. "Miss Winters," Ezra stepped forward, removing his hat. "Welcome to Pinos Altos. I'm Sheriff Ezra Granger." She studied him for a moment, then offered a small, guarded smile. "Sheriff, thank you for meeting me." Her voice carried the refined accent of the East, but lacked the condescension he'd expected. "These are my children," Ezra said, gesturing to the brood behind him. Margaret, Thomas, Samuel, and the twins, Lucy and Levy. Winifred's expression softened as she regarded the children. "How wonderful to meet you all. I look forward to having you in my classroom." Margaret stepped forward, executing a small curtsy. "We're pleased to meet you, Miss Winters. Pa says you're going to teach us all about literature and mathematics and science." "That's the plan," Winifred replied, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Ezra noticed how her gaze kept darting around, as if expecting someone to object to her presence. "Let me help with your bags, Miss Winters. Mrs. Sullivan has prepared a room for you at the boarding house." As Ben unloaded her luggage, a surprisingly modest trunk, and two valises' whispers rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. That's her. Heard she disgraced her whole family back east. What was it? A married man? No, something about challenging a church elder. My cousin in Denver says she was dismissed from a teaching position there too. Ezra shot a stern look at the gossip mongers, silencing them temporarily. Whatever this woman's past, she deserved a fair chance in Pinos Altos. Winifred held her head high, though a flush had crept into her pale cheeks. I assure you, Sheriff, I am fully qualified to teach your children. I graduated from the Boston Teachers College with highest honors. I don't doubt it for a moment, Miss Winters, Ezra replied, lifting her heaviest trunk with ease. Folks here just don't have much to occupy their minds besides other people's business. You'll find they're good people once you get to know them. I've found that good people can sometimes be the quickest to judge, she said softly, more to herself than to him. Little Lucy broke away from the group, running forward to tug at Winifred's skirt. Miss Winters, do you know any stories? Pa tries, but he's not very good at the voices. Winifred's face transformed with a genuine smile. I know hundreds of stories, Lucy. Perhaps I can share one after I've settled in. Ezra watched the interaction with interest. This woman was clearly no fragile Eastern flower, despite her refined appearance. There was steel beneath that proper exterior steel she would need to survive in Pinos Altos. Children, give Miss Winters some space. She's had a long journey. He turned to the newcomer. School starts Monday, so you have 3 days to settle in. If you need anything, my office is just down the street. Thank you, Sheriff. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who carried more than their fair share of burdens. As they walked toward the boarding house, Ezra was acutely aware of the contrast they presented him, tall and weather-beaten, with sun-bleached hair and a perpetual squint from years under the New Mexico sun. Her pale and composed, despite the rigors of travel. Yet there was something oddly complimentary about them. Your children seem wonderful, Winifred said as they navigated the dusty Main Street. They must take after their mother. Ezra's step faltered slightly. Hannah passed 3 years ago, childbed fever with Levy and Lucy. Winifred's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. We manage. Ezra didn't elaborate on the sleepless nights, the meals burned beyond recognition, or the constant worry that he was failing at the most important job of his life. The town helps when they can. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure that was one of the more impressive buildings in Pinos Altos. Mrs. Sullivan, a robust widow in her 50s, stood waiting on the porch. Miss Winters, welcome, welcome. I've prepared the corner room with the best view of the mountains. She ushered them inside, casting a suspicious glance at the newcomer. I run a respectable establishment here. I would expect nothing less, Mrs. Sullivan, Winifred replied with practiced politeness. Ezra cleared his throat. I'll leave you to get settled, Miss Winters. Children, come along. But Pa, Samuel began. No arguments. Miss Winters needs rest. He set down her trunk and tipped his hat. Town Council meets tomorrow afternoon at 2. They'd like to welcome you officially. I'll be there, Winifred promised. As Ezra herded his reluctant children back to their home above the sheriff's office, he found himself wondering about the story behind Winifred Winters' arrival in their remote mining town. Whatever scandal had driven her from Boston to the New Mexico territory must have been significant. Yet something told him the rumors couldn't possibly capture the truth of this woman, with her proud bearing and eyes that held both sadness and determination. Pinos Altos might be the place where Winifred Winters had been sent in disgrace, but Ezra suspected she might just find something unexpected here if the town gave her the chance. The following morning, Winifred rose with the sun, determined to familiarize herself with her new home. The boarding house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, having slept better than expected after weeks of uncomfortable travel. Mrs. Sullivan was already in the kitchen, kneading dough with forceful movements that suggested she was working out frustrations beyond what bread-making required. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan. Is there anything I might help with?" The older woman looked up, surprise evident on her face. "You're up early. Didn't expect that from a city lady." "I've always been an early riser," Winifred replied, choosing to ignore the implication. "And I'd like to see the schoolhouse before meeting with the town council." Mrs. Sullivan pushed a cup of coffee toward her. "It's at the north end of town. One room, nothing fancy. You'll be teaching ages 5 to 16 altogether." Winifred nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've taught in similar conditions before." "Have you now?" Mrs. Sullivan's tone suggested skepticism. "I heard you came from some fancy Boston school." "I trained in Boston, yes, but I've taught in various situations since." Winifred wouldn't elaborate on the circumstances that had led her from one teaching position to another, each time moving further west, each time hoping to outrun her reputation. After a simple breakfast of cornbread and honey, Winifred set out to explore Pinos Altos. The morning was crisp despite the April date, the elevation making for cool mornings even as the days would likely turn warm. The town was already bustling with activity, miners heading to the surrounding hills, merchants opening their establishments. She received curious stares as she walked, some hostile, some merely interested. A young woman alone was still a novelty in the West, especially one dressed in the simple but unmistakably Eastern-styled blue dress she wore. The schoolhouse was exactly as Mrs. Sullivan had described, a single-room building with rows of rough-hewn benches, a blackboard, and little else. The previous teacher, she'd been told, was a miner's wife who had returned east after her husband was killed in a collapse. The room had stood empty for months. Winifred ran her fingers over the teacher's desk, noting the deep gouges in the wood, the ink stains, the years of use etched into its surface. This would be her domain now, her chance to start anew. It ain't much, but the children are eager to learn. She turned to find Ezra Granger standing in the doorway, hat in hand. In the morning light, she could better see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his light brown hair despite his relatively young age. Life had not been easy on this man. "Sheriff Granger, you startled me." "Apologies, Miss Winters. I saw you heading this way and thought you might have questions." He stepped inside, his tall frame seeming to make the schoolroom smaller. "The key is hanging by the door there. It's yours now." Winifred nodded, taking in the barren walls. "It needs books and maps. Perhaps some proper desks for the older students. Town budget is tight, but I reckon we can manage something. The mine's been producing well this season." Ezra moved to open a window, letting in fresh air. "My Margaret's been keeping the younger ones up with their letters and numbers, but she's just a girl herself. She seems very responsible. Had to grow up fast after her ma died." There was a wealth of unspoken pain in those simple words. They all did. Winifred hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "How do you manage, Sheriff? 5 children and your duties to the town." A small, tired smile crossed his face. "One day at a time, Miss Winters. Some days better than others. The town helps Mrs. Rodriguez watches the twins while I'm working. Reverend Taylor takes the boys fishing sometimes." He paused. "It's not ideal, but it's what we have." The honesty in his answer touched her. Here was a man who didn't pretend life was anything other than the struggle it often was. How refreshing after the facades of Boston society. "Well, Your children will have my full attention during school hours, at least." She moved to the blackboard, testing it with her finger. "And perhaps I could offer additional lessons for Margaret. She seems bright." "Too bright for her own good sometimes," Ezra said with a hint of pride. "Been reading my law books when she thinks I'm not looking." Winifred smiled. "An admirable ambition. For a boy, maybe. Don't know what use law books are to a girl who will just end up married with children of her own." But there was uncertainty in his voice, as if he wasn't entirely convinced by his own words. "The world is changing, Sheriff Granger. Even out here." He studied her for a moment. "Is that what got you in trouble back east, having ideas about women's place that didn't sit well with the menfolk?" Winifred stiffened. "My personal history is just that personal." Ezra raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Meant no offense. Just trying to understand what brings an educated woman like yourself to a place like Pinos Altos. The same thing that brings anyone to a new place, Sheriff. The hope for a fresh start." She turned away, busying herself with examining the meager supply cabinet. Ezra was quiet for a moment, then said, "Well, you'll find most folks here judge a person on what they do, not what they've done. Eventually, anyway." "That would be a welcome change," she murmured. "Council meetings at 2. I can escort you there if you'd like." Winifred turned back to him. "Thank you, but I'm perfectly capable of finding my way." He nodded, seeming unsurprised by her independence. "Fair enough. Just be prepared, old Mr. Hollister may ask some pointed questions. He was against bringing in an outsider." "I'm quite used to defending my qualifications, Sheriff Granger." "I don't doubt it." He settled his hat back on his head. "For what it's worth, Miss Winters, my children haven't stopped talking about you since yesterday. Whatever brought you here, I'm grateful you've come." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and the empty schoolroom that represented her last chance at redemption. The town council meeting proved to be exactly the inquisition Ezra had warned her about. The 5 council members, all men of varying ages and demeanors, sat behind a long table in the town hall, regarding Winifred with expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "Miss Winters," began Harold Hollister, a silver-haired former banker who now owned the largest mercantile in town, "your credentials are impressive on paper. Graduate of Boston Teachers College, positions at several schools across the country." He peered at her over wire-rimmed spectacles. "What we're concerned with is why a woman of your education has moved progressively westward over the past 3 years, never remaining in one position for more than a school term." Winifred had anticipated this line of questioning. "I've always been drawn to places where education is most needed, Mr. Hollister. The established schools of the East have plenty of qualified teachers. The expanding territories offer more opportunities to make a meaningful difference." "A noble sentiment," said Reverend Taylor, the youngest of the council members. "But surely there's more to it than that." Ezra, who stood at the back of the room, shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't officially part of the meeting, but had attended anyway, ostensibly to maintain order, though Winifred suspected he had come to offer silent support. "I believe in speaking truth to power, gentlemen," Winifred said carefully. "That has occasionally put me at odds with those who prefer unquestioning obedience, particularly from women. If you're asking whether I will teach your children to think for themselves, the answer is yes. If that concerns you, perhaps I'm not the teacher you're looking for." A murmur ran through the small crowd of townspeople who had gathered to witness the meeting. Ezra's expression remained impassive, but she thought she detected a flicker of approval in his eyes. Hollister cleared his throat. "What we're concerned about, Miss Winters, is whether you'll respect the values of this community. We're simple folk out here." Simple doesn't mean ignorant, Mr. Hollister, she replied evenly. I've found wisdom in mining camps that rival the halls of Harvard. I will respect your community's values while encouraging your children to explore ideas beyond these mountains. Isn't that what education is for? Miguel Rodriguez, who owned the town's only restaurant, leaned forward. My Juanita, she's 12. Smart girl. Her mama wants her to learn more than just cooking and sewing. You will teach the girls the same as the boys. Absolutely, Mr. Rodriguez. Every child deserves the same opportunity to learn. Rodriguez nodded, satisfied. Then I say we give her a chance. 1 term, see how it goes. The other council members exchanged glances. Finally, Mayor Thomas Wilson, a portly man with a prospector's weathered face, spoke up. Very well. Miss Winters, you're hired for 1 school term to begin Monday next. Salary is $40 a month with room and board at Mrs. Sullivan's included. The school term runs through November, with a harvest break in August. Thank you, gentlemen. I won't disappoint you. Winifred fought to keep the relief from her voice. She had enough funds to last perhaps another month. This position had truly been her last hope. As the meeting adjourned, townspeople approached to introduce themselves. Some warm, others reserved. Ezra hung back, speaking with the council members in low tones that Winifred couldn't quite catch. Later, as she walked back toward the boarding house, he fell into step beside her. You handled yourself well in there, he said. It wasn't my first interrogation, Sheriff. Ezra, he corrected. Might as well use my given name if you're going to be teaching my children. She considered this for a moment. Winifred, then, though most call me Winnie. Winnie, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. It suits you better. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke again. The children were wondering if you might join us for supper tonight. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, maybe some venison if Thomas managed to snare a rabbit today. But they're eager to know more about their new teacher. The invitation surprised her. Are you certain that's appropriate? There might be talk. A wry smile crossed his face. Miss Winters, Winnie, there's already talk. There's always talk in a town this size. But my children need exposure to an educated woman, and I. He hesitated. I could use the adult conversation, truth be told, unless you've had your fill of Grangers for 1 day. The genuine loneliness in his voice resonated with something in her. How long had it been since she'd had a real conversation that wasn't guarded by fear of judgment? I'd be delighted, Sheriff Ezra. What time should I arrive? 6 would be fine. We're just above my office, can't miss it. As he tipped his hat and continued toward the jailhouse, Winnie found herself wondering what she'd gotten herself into. Ezra Granger was unlike any man she'd met before, direct without being crude, strong without being domineering. And those 5 children, hungry for knowledge and maternal care. She would need to be careful. Getting too close to this family could only lead to heartache when her inevitable past caught up with her. It always did. Yet, as she prepared for dinner that evening, Winnie couldn't help the small bloom of hope in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, Pinos Altos might be different. The Granger home above the sheriff's office was humble but surprisingly cozy. Ezra had clearly made efforts to create a proper home for his children. Handmade curtains hung at the windows. Braided rugs covered the rough wooden floors, and children's drawings adorned the walls. Yet there were unmistakable signs of a household missing: a woman's touch, mismatched dishes, darned clothing that could have used a more skilled hand, and the slightly chaotic energy of 5 children who, despite obvious discipline, lacked the organizing influence of a mother. Miss Winters. Margaret greeted her at the door, her long brown hair neatly braided for the occasion. Please come in. I helped Pa set the table special. It looks lovely, Winnie said, noting the wildflowers in a mason jar at the center of the worn oak table. She handed Margaret a small package. "I brought some molasses cookies from Mrs. Sullivan's kitchen. She assured me they were quite good." "Cookies!" the twins exclaimed in unison, appearing as if summoned by the mere mention of sweets. Ezra emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen area, sleeves rolled up and an apron protecting his clothes. The domestic image of the strong sheriff was endearing in a way Winnie hadn't expected. "Glad you could make it," he said, wiping his hands on the apron. "Hope you like venison stew." "It's about the only thing I can cook that doesn't end up burned." "It smells wonderful," she replied honestly. The rich aroma of meat, herbs, and vegetables filled the small apartment. Samuel and Thomas appeared from another room, both with freshly combed hair and clean faces that suggested they'd been instructed to make themselves presentable. "Boys, say hello to Miss Winters," Ezra prompted. "Hello, Miss Winters," they chorused with the reluctant politeness of young boys everywhere. "Hello, Samuel Thomas. I'm very much looking forward to having you in my classroom." She bent slightly to address them at eye level. "Do either of you have a favorite subject?" Thomas shuffled his feet. "I like drawing maps. Pa says I got a good eye for detail. Geography is a wonderful subject. Perhaps you can help me create some new maps for the schoolroom." The boy's eyes lit up at being given such an important task. "Yes, madam, I could do that." "And you, Samuel?" The younger boy looked up shyly. "I like stories, about knights and dragons and such." "Then you'll enjoy our literature lessons. I've brought some wonderful books with me." Ezra watched the interaction with a hint of surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to take such genuine interest in his children's passions. "Dinner's ready if you'd all like to sit down," he said. "Margaret, would you pour the milk, please?" The meal was simple but delicious, the venison tender in a rich gravy with potatoes and wild onions. The children, initially reserved, soon warmed to their guest, peppering her with questions about Boston, her journey west, and what they would learn in school. "Will we learn about the stars?" Lucy asked, her small face earnest. "Pa says there are more stars than anyone can count, but I think if we tried real hard we might manage it." Winnie smiled at the child's determination. "Astronomy is certainly something we can explore. There are constellations pictures made of stars that have stories dating back thousands of years." "Like what kind of stories?" Samuel asked, his interest piqued. "Well, there's Orion the hunter and Andromeda the princess. The ancient Greeks believed these were people and creatures placed in the sky by their gods. Could we go look at them sometime?" Thomas asked. Ezra cleared his throat. "That's enough questions for now. Miss Winters is here to enjoy her meal, not conduct a class." "I don't mind, truly," Winnie assured him. "Their curiosity is refreshing. Still, there are manners to consider." His tone was gentle but firm, and the children obediently turned their attention back to their meals. As the evening progressed, Winnie found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. The Grangers, for all their rough edges, had a warmth and honesty that made her feel welcome. Even little Levy, the shyest of the bunch, eventually climbed onto her lap to show her a carved wooden horse Ezra had made him. After the meal, while Margaret supervised the younger children in cleaning up, Ezra invited Winnie to join him on the small balcony overlooking the main street of Pinos Altos. The evening was mild, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Your children are wonderful," she said, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "You've done an admirable job with them." Ezra leaned against the railing, his profile strong against the twilight. "I do my best, not always sure it's enough." "They're healthy, respectful, and curious about the world. That speaks volumes." He was quiet for a moment, then said, Hannah, my wife, she had plans for them all. Margaret was going to learn piano. Thomas would study medicine, maybe. She had it all mapped out. He shook his head slightly. Sometimes I feel like I'm letting her down, just keeping them fed and clothed and somewhat educated. The raw honesty of his confession touched Winnie deeply. I think any mother would be proud to see her children so loved and cared for. The rest will come in time. Maybe. He took a sip of his coffee. Can I ask you something, Winnie? You don't have to answer if it's too personal. She tensed slightly but nodded. What really brought you out here? A woman with your education could find positions in much more comfortable places. Winnie stared into her coffee cup, weighing how much to reveal. I believe in speaking truth, especially when it's uncomfortable for those in authority. That hasn't always been appreciated. What kind of truth got you sent west? She sighed. In Boston, I spoke against a school board member who was taking liberties with female students. In Denver, I taught girls mathematics and science despite being instructed to focus on homemaking skills. In Santa Fe, I refused to cane a Native American child for speaking his own language. She met his eyes directly. None of these were popular positions. Rather than the judgment she expected, she saw something like admiration in his gaze. Seems to me you've been standing up for what's right, even at personal cost. That's not something to be ashamed of. The world doesn't always reward principle, Sheriff. No, he agreed. It surely doesn't. But I'd rather my children learn from someone with principles than someone who just tells them what everyone wants to hear. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the last light faded from the sky. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, a sound Winnie was still getting used to after the urban noises of the East. It's getting late, Ezra finally said. I should see you back to the boarding house. That's not necessary. It's only a short walk. Humor me. It's still a mining town with its share of rough characters, especially on a Friday night. They collected her shawl and said good night to the children, who extracted a promise from Winnie to tell them a proper story next time she visited. The easy assumption that there would be a next time warmed her unexpectedly. The walk to Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house was brief, the night air cool but pleasant. Lanterns glowed in windows, and from the saloon came the sound of a piano played with more enthusiasm than skill. Thank you for dinner, Winnie said as they reached the boarding house steps. It was the most enjoyable evening I've had in quite some time. We were glad for the company. Ezra hesitated, then added, the children's mother used to read to them every night. They miss that. If you ever wanted to come by sometime just to read a story, well, they'd be mighty pleased. The request was clearly difficult for him to make, a proud man asking for help, not for himself but for his children. I'd like that very much, she replied softly. He nodded, seemingly relieved. Good night then, Miss Winters. Good night, Sheriff. As she watched him walk back toward his office, straight-backed and steady, Winnie realized she was treading dangerous ground. Getting close to the Grangers meant putting down roots in Pinos Altos, becoming part of the community. And the deeper those roots grew, the more painful it would be when she inevitably had to pull them up again. Because no matter how far west she ran, Winnie knew her past was always just one telegram behind her. The first day of school arrived with clear skies and nervous excitement from both teacher and students. Winnie had spent the weekend preparing the schoolhouse, cleaning years of dust from corners, arranging the limited supplies to best advantage, and setting up a crude library from the books she had brought with her. The children began arriving at 8 o'clock, some eager, others clearly reluctant. The Granger children were among the first, with Margaret herding her siblings into neat order just as she had at their home. Good morning, Miss Winters, she said formally. We're ready for our education. Winnie smiled at the girl's serious demeanor. "Good morning, Margaret. Children, please find seats older students toward the back, younger ones up front, if you would." By 8:30, 23 students ranging from 5 to 16 years of age had assembled in the schoolroom. They represented the diversity of Pinos Altos, children of miners, merchants, and ranchers, mostly Anglo but with several Hispanic children and 2 whose mothers were Apache, married to white settlers. "Welcome, everyone," Winnie began, standing before her desk. "I'm Miss Winters, and I'm delighted to be your teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn all your names and a little about each of you." As the children introduced themselves, Winnie noted the social dynamics at play. Diego Rodriguez, Miguel's son, was clearly well liked by the other boys. 16-year-old Virginia Hollister, daughter of the disapproving council member, sat with a haughty expression that suggested she felt the whole enterprise beneath her. The twins, Lucy and Levy, clung to each other, still young enough to find security in their identical appearance despite being different genders. After introductions, Winnie administered simple assessments to determine each child's level of knowledge. As she had suspected, the education had been inconsistent at best. Some older children could barely read, while younger ones like Margaret had surprisingly advanced skills. "We'll be dividing into groups for some subjects," she explained. "Everyone will learn reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and natural sciences. But you'll work at different levels according to your abilities." By noon, when the children were released for their midday meal, Winnie had already begun to form attachments to her diverse group of students. Thomas Granger showed a genuine talent for geography and drawing. Diego Rodriguez asked insightful questions about the science demonstration she'd performed. Even sullen Virginia Hollister had reluctantly engaged with a poetry recitation. As the children scattered to eat their packed lunches under the large cottonwood tree outside, Winnie sat at her desk, making notes about each student's progress and needs. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Ezra's arrival until his shadow fell across her papers. "How goes the battle?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. She looked up, surprised. "Sheriff, I didn't expect to see you midday. Thought I'd check in, see if the savages had overwhelmed you yet." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, she noticed. "Hardly savages. They're bright children, most eager to learn. Even mine, especially yours." She set down her pencil. "Margaret could be reading at a college level by year's end if given the right materials. Thomas has a cartographer's eye. Samuel absorbs stories like a sponge." Pride softened Ezra's weather-lined face. Hannah would be pleased to hear that. She always said they had potential beyond this mining town. "And what do you say?" He considered the question seriously. "I say I want them to have choices I never had, whether that's staying here or going elsewhere." Winnie found herself warming to this man who wanted more for his children than the limitations of his own life. A wise approach. Ezra glanced out the window at the children playing. "Brought you something." He placed a small package wrapped in brown paper on her desk. "Nothing fancy. Just thought it might be useful." Curious, Winnie unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted wooden pointer for the blackboard, its handle smooth to a satiny finish, her initials WW burned into the wood. "You made this," he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Whittling helps me think. Had some good oak left from a repair job. It's beautiful, thank you." She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the thoughtful gift. "It's nothing." He cleared his throat. "Should let you get back to your work. Just wanted to make sure everything was going smoothly." "It is. Though I could use more books if the town budget allows. I'll mention it to the council." He settled his hat back on his head. The children were wondering if you might come for supper again Friday. I make a passable rabbit stew and they're eager for more stories. Winnie hesitated only briefly. Professional boundaries suggested she should maintain a certain distance from the families of her students. But Pinos Altos wasn't Boston, and these children needed more than just academic instruction. I'd be delighted, she said. Perhaps this time I could bring dessert. The children would like that. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. So would I. As he left, tipping his hat to the children who called out greetings, Winnie found herself watching him with a curiosity that went beyond professional interest. Ezra Granger was a man performing a role traditionally filled by both mother and father. A lawman who crafted delicate wooden gifts. A frontier sheriff who wanted his children to have options beyond the frontier. She would need to be careful. Her heart had led her astray before, with disastrous consequences. But as she called the children back to their lessons, Winnie couldn't help but feel that something was taking root in Pinos Altos, something that might, if she dared to nurture it, become a kind of home. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment to Winnie's life. Mornings were spent in the schoolhouse. Afternoons often included additional lessons for students who needed extra help or were particularly advanced. And evenings were her own, though increasingly. Those evenings included suppers with the Grangers or reading sessions, where the children of Pinos Altos gathered at the schoolhouse to hear stories as twilight fell. May brought warmer days and the gradual acceptance of the townspeople. Mrs. Sullivan, initially cool, had warmed considerably after witnessing Winnie's dedication to her students. Even Harold Hollister had grudgingly admitted that his granddaughter Virginia was showing improved manners and interest in her studies. It was on a particularly fine Saturday in late May when Ezra appeared at the boarding house, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Miss Winters," he began, then corrected himself. "Winnie, I was wondering if you might be interested in a picnic today. The children have been cooped up all week with studies, and there's a nice spot by the creek about a mile out of town." Mrs. Sullivan, who happened to be sweeping the porch, raised her eyebrows but said nothing. "A picnic sounds lovely," Winnie replied, "though I haven't anything prepared. Margaret's been baking since sunrise. We have more than enough." He shifted his weight slightly. Unless you had other plans for the day, in truth, her plan had been to review lesson plans and mend a tear in her second-best dress. "No other plans. I'd be happy to join you. Shall I meet you at your home? If it's not too much trouble, we thought we'd collect you. The wagon's already hitched." Sure enough, when Winnie stepped onto the porch, she saw the Granger children waiting in a small wagon, their faces alight with anticipation. Margaret sat primly on the bench, supervising the younger ones who were arranged in the back among baskets and blankets. The day was perfect for an outing, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. As they traveled the short distance to the creek, the children chattered excitedly about the fish they hoped to catch, the rocks they would collect, the flowers they had spotted on previous visits. The picnic spot proved to be a small clearing beside a burbling creek, shaded by cottonwoods and pines, with wildflowers dotting the grassy areas. It was peaceful in a way that the bustling mining town could never be. "This is beautiful," Winnie said as Ezra helped her down from the wagon. "How did you find it?" "Hannah showed me," he replied quietly. It was her favorite place to escape the dust and noise of town. The mention of his late wife didn't carry the weight of sadness it once had, Winnie noticed. There was fondness in his voice, but the sharp edge of grief seemed to have softened. The children scattered immediately, Thomas and Samuel to the creek with improvised fishing poles, the twins to collect flowers, and Margaret to supervise the unpacking of food. "They seem happy," Winnie observed, watching as Lucy crowned her brother with a circlet of daisies. "Happier than they've been in a long while," Ezra agreed. "Having a proper school, a teacher who cares about them, it's made a difference. They're remarkable children. You should be proud." He nodded, his gaze fixed on his family. "I am. Every day." Then he turned to her. "Would you like to see the old Apache pictographs? They're just up that rise carved into the rock face. The twins are still too young to make the climb easily." "I'd love to." They walked together up a gentle slope, leaving Margaret in charge of the younger children. The path was easy enough, though Winnie was grateful for Ezra's steady hand when they crossed a particularly rocky section. "The Apache consider this area sacred," Ezra explained as they neared the rock face. "These carvings are at least 200 years old, according to the tribal elders." The pictographs were indeed impressive, stylized figures of animals and humans, celestial symbols and abstract patterns etched into the red sandstone. Winnie ran her fingers lightly over the ancient artwork. "It's humbling to think of the hands that created these so long ago," she murmured. "The old ways are disappearing fast," Ezra said. "Too fast, maybe. There's wisdom here we're losing in our rush for progress." Winnie glanced at him, surprised by the sentiment. "Most men in your position wouldn't acknowledge that." "Most men in my position haven't lived side by side with the Apache, learned their language, shared their food." He shrugged. "Before I became sheriff, I scouted for the army, learned to respect the people they called enemies." This new piece of information added another layer to her understanding of Ezra Granger. "You're an unusual man, Sheriff. Just a man who's seen enough to know that people are people, no matter their origins." He met her gaze directly. "Speaking of origins, I received a letter yesterday." "From Boston." Winnie's breath caught. "I see." "It was addressed to me as sheriff, asking about a Miss Winnie Winters, formerly of Boston, last known to be teaching in Santa Fe." His expression remained neutral. "Seems someone named Gideon Blackwell is quite interested in your whereabouts." The name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "And what did you tell this Mr. Blackwell?" "Nothing yet. Thought I should speak with you first." She turned away, focusing on the ancient carvings rather than Ezra's penetrating gaze. Gideon Blackwell was an influential member of the Boston School Board, the man I accused of inappropriate behavior toward female students, the man who got you sent west. Yes. She wrapped her arms around herself. "He's also my former fiancé." Ezra's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's a complication you didn't mention." "I was engaged to him before I discovered his true nature. When I broke the engagement and publicly accused him, it created quite the scandal. His family has connections throughout New England and beyond. They've made it their mission to ensure I never find permanent employment or peace. And now he's tracked you to New Mexico territory." Winnie nodded, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "It was only a matter of time. It always is." Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What would happen if I wrote back saying I'd never heard of you?" She looked at him sharply. "That would be a lie." "Sometimes a lie serves justice better than the truth, especially when the truth gives power to those who would abuse it." The offer was tempting, so tempting that Winnie felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever offered to protect her before. She'd been fighting this battle alone for 3 years. "I can't ask you to compromise your integrity as sheriff." "You didn't ask. I offered." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "The children need you, Winnie. The school needs you. And he stopped, then continued more carefully. "The town would be poorer for your leaving." Before she could respond, a shout from below interrupted them. "Pa, Miss Winters, look what we caught." Samuel stood by the creek, proudly holding up a decent-sized trout, Thomas beside him with a matching fish. "We should get back," Winnie said, grateful for the interruption. "But thank you, Ezra, for understanding, and for the offer." As they descended to rejoin the children, Ezra said quietly, "Nothing has to be decided today. Just know that you have allies here. You're not alone anymore." The simple statement affected her more profoundly than any grand declaration could have. Not alone. For the first time in years, Winnie dared to believe it might be true. The picnic itself was joyous fresh bread and cheese, cold chicken, early berries collected by the children, and fish freshly caught and cooked over a small fire. They ate on blankets spread beneath the cottonwoods, the children recounting school adventures for their father, who listened with genuine interest to every story. As the afternoon waned, the twins curled up for a nap, while Thomas and Samuel engaged in a stone skipping contest at the creek's edge. Margaret, ever the responsible eldest, sat beside Winnie, asking questions about Boston and what it was like to attend a women's college. "You think I could go to college someday?" the girl asked, her expression serious beyond her years. Winnie considered the question carefully. "If that's what you truly want, I believe you could. You have the intelligence and determination, but it would require hard work and perhaps some sacrifices. Pa says education is never wasted, even if I end up just being a wife and mother. Your father is a wise man. And being a wife and mother isn't just anything, it's important work. But it doesn't have to be your only identity." Margaret mulled this over. "Mrs. Hollister says a woman who pursues education beyond basic finishing school is unnatural and unlikely to find a husband." Winnie chuckled despite herself. "And yet here I am, having received a college education, and I've had a proposal of marriage." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Ezra, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, looked at her with unmistakable interest. "You were engaged?" Margaret asked, fascinated. "What happened?" "That's enough questions for Miss Winters," Ezra intervened gently. "Some matters are private." "It's all right," Winnie said. "Yes, Margaret, I was engaged. But I discovered the man wasn't who I thought he was, so I broke the engagement." "Was your heart broken?" the girl asked with the romantic curiosity of youth. "My pride was hurt more than my heart, I think." It was a simplified version of the truth, but appropriate for a child's ears. "I learned that it's better to be alone than to be with someone who doesn't respect you." Margaret nodded solemnly. "I think you're very brave, Miss Winters." "Thank you, Margaret. I think you're quite brave yourself." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they packed up the remains of their picnic. The children, tired but happy, piled into the wagon with minimal fuss. Even the usually rambunctious twins were subdued, drowsy from fresh air and exercise. On the ride back to town, Winnie found herself seated beside Ezra on the wagon bench, the children arranged behind them. The twins soon fell asleep, while Thomas and Samuel quietly discussed their fishing triumph. Margaret, ever vigilant, kept watch over her siblings. "Thank you for including me today," Winnie said softly. "It was wonderful." Ezra's hands were steady on the reins, his profile strong in the golden light of late afternoon. "The children would have been disappointed if you'd declined." "And you?" He glanced at her briefly, then returned his attention to the trail. "I would have been disappointed as well." They rode in companionable silence for a while before he spoke again. "About that letter, I think the right thing to do is to tell this Blackwell that we have no record of you here." "You would do that?" "I would, for the right reasons." The implication was clear. He considered protecting her to be the right reason, even if it meant bending the truth. The realization that someone was willing to stand between her and her past was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As they approached the outskirts of town, Ezra said, "I'm not much for dancing, but the town's holding a social next Saturday to celebrate the end of spring planting. Would you consider attending with me and the children?" The invitation was casual but held deeper implications. A public appearance together at a social event would signal to the town that there was something more than a professional relationship between them. Winnie hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that very much." His smile was quick but genuine. "Good. That's good." As they pulled up to the boarding house, Mrs. Sullivan was, as usual, positioned on the porch where she could observe all comings and goings. Winnie was certain that by supper time the entire town would know she had spent the day with the Grangers. Strangely, the thought didn't trouble her as it once might have. Let them talk. For the first time in years, she was allowing herself to imagine a future that included more than just running from the past. When Ezra helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. The children called out their goodbyes, extracting a promise that she would join them for Sunday dinner after church the next day. As she watched the wagon continue down the street toward the sheriff's office, Winnie felt a curious lightness in her heart. The specter of Gideon Blackwell still loomed, but it seemed less threatening somehow. Here in Pinos Altos, surrounded by mountains and good people, perhaps she had finally found a place to stand her ground. The town social was held in the cleared floor of Rodriguez's barn, decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Nearly everyone in Pinos Altos attended, dressed in their Sunday best, bringing dishes to share at the long tables set up along one wall. A trio of local musicians, fiddle, guitar, and harmonica, provided lively music for dancing. Winnie had agonized over her appearance more than she cared to admit. Her wardrobe was limited, but she had spent precious hours altering her best blue dress, adding lace from her mother's collar to freshen it. Mrs. Sullivan, who had warmed to her considerably, had lent her a cameo brooch that complemented the outfit perfectly. "You look very pretty, Miss Winters," Margaret said as the Grangers collected her from the boarding house. The girl herself was wearing a dress that Winnie recognized as one she had helped alter the previous week, letting out seams to accommodate Margaret's recent growth. "Thank you, Margaret. You look lovely as well." She turned to the boys, all three uncomfortably tidy in clean shirts and slicked back hair. "And don't you gentlemen look handsome tonight?" Thomas and Samuel shuffled their feet in embarrassment, but Levy beamed with pride. "Pa made us wash behind our ears twice." "A necessary precaution, I'm sure," Winnie replied solemnly, catching Ezra's eye with a smile. Ezra himself had clearly made an effort. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean dark suit, slightly worn at the elbows but well fitted to his broad shoulders. His hair was neatly combed and he had trimmed his beard. He looked, Winnie thought, quite distinguished. "Ready for an evening of rural entertainment?" he asked, offering his arm. "More than ready," she replied, taking it. With the children leading the way, they walked toward the Rodriguez property at the edge of town. The barn was already bustling when they arrived. Lantern light cast a warm glow over the festivities, and the air was filled with conversation, laughter, and music. Children darted between adults playing improvised games of tag and hide and seek. "Sheriff, Miss Winters," Miguel Rodriguez greeted them warmly. "Welcome, welcome. Food is there, drinks are there, dancing is everywhere," he clapped Ezra on the shoulder. "Your first social since Hannah, no? Good to see you joining again." Ezra nodded acknowledgement, though Winnie felt him tense slightly at the mention of his late wife. "The children were eager to come," he said, which wasn't quite an answer. The evening progressed pleasantly. The Granger children quickly found their friends, though Margaret checked in regularly with her father, taking her responsibilities as eldest seriously. Winnie was welcomed by most of the townspeople, many parents thanking her for the positive changes they'd seen in their children since school began. Even Harold Hollister grudgingly admitted that his granddaughter's penmanship had improved remarkably. "Though I still say too much book learning isn't natural for a girl," he added. "Perhaps not," Winnie replied diplomatically, "but Virginia has a fine mind. It would be a shame not to develop it." Hollister harumphed, but didn't argue further. After the communal meal, the musicians struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to take to the dance floor. Ezra, true to his word about not being much of a dancer, remained on the sidelines, though he tapped his foot in time with the music. "Would you care to dance, Miss Winters?" The question came from Ben Franklin, the stagecoach driver who had first brought her to Pinos Altos. Though considerably older, he was spry and good-natured. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Franklin," she replied, accepting his outstretched hand. The dance was a simple reel that Winnie remembered from socials in her youth. Ben proved to be a capable partner, guiding her through the steps with good-humored commentary on the other dancers. From the corner of her eye, Winnie was aware of Ezra watching them, his expression unreadable. When the music ended, Ben returned her to Ezra's side with a flourish. "Fine dancer, your schoolteacher," he said. "You should take a turn, Sheriff." Before Ezra could respond, the musicians began a slower waltz. Ben disappeared into the crowd with a wink, leaving them alone. "I wasn't entirely truthful earlier," Ezra said, surprising her. "I can dance. I just haven't wanted to until now." He offered his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Winters?" The formality of his request, the unexpected vulnerability in his expression, touched her deeply. "I would be honored, Sheriff Granger." He led her onto the floor with more grace than she had expected from a man who spent his days on horseback or behind a desk. One hand rested lightly at her waist, the other holding hers with gentle firmness. They moved together easily, as if they had danced many times before. "You dance very well for a man who claims not to care for it," she observed. A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Hannah insisted I learn before we were married. Said she wouldn't have a husband who couldn't escort her properly at socials. She sounds like a wise woman." She was. His eyes held a distant look for a moment, then refocused on her. "She would have liked you, I think. Your spirit, your dedication to the children." The comparison to his beloved wife was unexpectedly moving. "That's a lovely thing to say." They continued dancing, gradually moving closer until the proper distance between them had diminished to something more intimate than the social norms dictated. Winnie was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and pine that clung to him, the steady rhythm of their steps in perfect harmony. "People are watching," she murmured, though she made no effort to increase the distance between them. "Let them," he replied simply. When the music ended, they remained still for a moment, reluctant to break the connection. Then reality reasserted itself in the form of Lucy tugging at her father's jacket. "Pa, can I have cake now? Mrs. Rodriguez said to ask you." Ezra released Winnie with obvious reluctance. "One piece only, Lucy, and share with your brother." As the evening wound down and families began to depart, Ezra collected his sleepy children. The twins were nearly asleep on their feet, while Thomas and Samuel fought yawns with diminishing success. Only Margaret remained alert, helping to gather their belongings. "Allow me to walk you home," Ezra said to Winnie, shifting Levy to his shoulder where the boy promptly fell asleep. "You have your hands full," she protested. "I can find my way. I insist." His tone brooked no argument. They made their way through the quiet streets of Pinos Altos, the children trudging alongside or, in the case of the twins, being carried. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead in the way that only seemed possible in the high mountain air. At the boarding house steps, Ezra instructed the older children to wait at the bottom while he saw Winnie to the door. Levi remained asleep against his shoulder, a small, warm weight. "Thank you for joining us tonight," he said, his voice low to avoid waking his son. It meant a great deal to the children. "And to you?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. In the silver light of the moon, his expression was open, unguarded. "More than I can properly express on a doorstep with 5 children in attendance." The implication made her heart beat faster. "Ezra, I'm not asking for anything, Winnie, not yet. Just wanted you to know that tonight was special for me, first time since Hannah that I've felt." He paused, searching for the right word. "Hopeful." Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his cheek just above his beard. "It was special for me, too." His free hand came up to gently touch her face, a fleeting caress that promised more. "Good night, Winnie." "Good night, Ezra." As she watched him gather his children and make his way back toward their home, Winnie felt a curious mixture of joy and trepidation. Joy, because for the first time in years, she was allowing herself to feel something for a man, to imagine a future that included love and family. Trepidation because she knew, with cold certainty, that Gideon Blackwell would not simply let her disappear. The letter that arrived 2 weeks after the social confirmed her worst fears. It came not to Ezra as sheriff but directly to her, delivered by the twice-weekly stagecoach that connected Pinos Altos to the wider world. Mrs. Sullivan handed it to her with undisguised curiosity. "Special delivery. Paid extra to find you, I expect." The handwriting on the envelope was achingly familiar, the precise, controlled script of a man who expected his every word to be treated as law. Gideon Blackwell had found her. Winnie waited until she was alone in her room before opening it, her hands trembling slightly as she broke the wax seal. "My dear Winifred," it began, the formal address a mockery of the intimacy they had once shared. "I trust this letter finds you well, though I confess disappointment that you have chosen such a remote and uncivilized location for your latest attempt to escape the consequences of your actions. Your continued flight only confirms your guilt in the eyes of society. I write not out of malice but concern. Your unfounded accusations have done considerable damage to my reputation and that of my family. However, I am prepared to be magnanimous. Return to Boston, publicly retract your statements, and I will use my influence to secure you a position teaching at a respectable girls' school. Your family misses you desperately, particularly your mother, whose health has declined in your absence. Should you choose to continue this childish rebellion, I am prepared to travel to New Mexico Territory myself to address the matter. I have already corresponded with several influential citizens of your adopted town, including a Mr. Harold Hollister, who expressed concern about your suitability as an educator once I enlightened him regarding your history. You have until July 1st to respond. I remain, as ever, your devoted friend, Gideon Blackwell." Winnie sank onto her bed, the letter clutched in her hand. The threat was clear: return and submit, or face him in Pinos Altos. Either way, the life she had begun to build here was in jeopardy. The mention of her mother troubled her deeply. Emily Winters had indeed been in fragile health when Winnie left Boston, but the quarterly letters from her sister indicated stability, not decline. Was Gideon lying about this as well? More troubling was his mention of correspondence with Harold Hollister. If he had indeed poisoned the mind of the influential council member against her, her position in Pinos Altos was already undermined. She needed to speak with Ezra immediately. She found him at his office, reviewing wanted posters with a distracted air that suggested his mind was elsewhere. He looked up when she entered, his expression brightening momentarily before registering her distress. "Winnie." "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it carefully, his jaw tightening as he progressed through Blackwell's elegant threats. "Bastard," he muttered when he finished. "Pardon my language." "He's contacted Hollister," she said, pacing the small confines of the sheriff's office. "If he turns the council against me, Hollister isn't the whole council," Ezra interrupted. "And the parents see how much good you're doing. The children are thriving under your teaching. You don't understand, Ezra. Gideon is persuasive, connected. He can make people believe whatever he wants them to believe. Not here. Not with me standing beside you." He rose from his desk and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Winnie, listen to me. You don't have to face this alone. Whatever he says, whatever he claims, we'll counter it with the truth." The conviction in his voice almost convinced her. Almost. "The truth didn't help me in Boston," she said quietly. "Or in Denver or Santa Fe." "Then perhaps it wasn't the whole truth that was told." He squeezed her hands gently. "Tell me everything, Winnie, from the beginning." She took a deep breath. "I met Gideon when I was 22, fresh out of teacher's college and idealistic. He was 35, a respected member of the school board, charming and well-connected. He took an interest in my career, helped me secure a position at a prestigious girls' school." She pulled away, moving to the window to gaze out at the dusty street of Pinos Altos. "I was flattered by his attention. When he proposed 6 months later, I accepted, believing I had found a partner who respected my intellect and ambitions." "But that wasn't the case," Ezra prompted gently. "No. Once we were engaged, subtle changes began. He expected me to defer to him in all matters. He criticized my teaching methods, suggesting that I was too progressive, that I was filling my students' heads with inappropriate ideas about women's capabilities." She turned back to face him. "Then I began to notice his behavior with some of the older girls at the school. Nothing overtly inappropriate at first, a hand on a shoulder that lingered too long, compliments on appearance rather than academic achievement. But it escalated. I caught him alone with a 16-year-old student in a situation that was compromising." Ezra's expression darkened. "He took advantage of a child in his care." "Yes. When I confronted him privately, he denied everything, claimed the girl had pursued him. When I went to the headmistress, he accused me of jealousy and invention, and when I broke our engagement and made public accusations." She shook her head. "His family closed ranks. The girl's parents, ambitious people who needed Blackwell family connections, refused to let her testify. I was dismissed from my position, ostracized from society. So you left Boston." "I had no choice. No school would hire me. My own family, while not disowning me outright, made it clear they found my behavior shameful. Only my sister maintained regular contact." She gestured to the letter still in his hand. "And now he's found me again. He won't stop, Ezra. He can't allow me to build a life elsewhere because it suggests that his version of events might not be the truth." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her story. Then he crossed to his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "What are you doing?" "Writing to the territorial governor," he said, dipping his pen in ink. "I've known him since the war. He owes me a favor or two." "The governor? For what purpose?" Ezra looked up, determination etched in every line of his face. "To request information about a certain Gideon Blackwell of Boston, specifically any legal complaints or investigations that might have been suppressed through family influence." Hope flickered within her. "You think there might be others? Men like that don't stop with one victim, Winnie, and they usually leave a trail, even if it's been covered up." He returned to his letter. In the meantime, I'll speak with the council members individually. Hollister may be influential, but Miguel Rodriguez has no love for him, and Reverend Taylor is more concerned with character than rumor. Ezra, I can't ask you to fight this battle for me. He set down his pen and met her gaze directly. You're not asking, I'm offering. Because what happens to you matters to me. Because you matter to me. The simple declaration, spoken without flourish or pretense, moved her more deeply than any elaborate profession of feelings could have. And if it costs you your position as sheriff, your standing in the community, then so be it, he shrugged as if the potential sacrifice were trivial. Some things are worth the risk, Winnie. She crossed the room to stand before him, overwhelmed by the loyalty of this man she had known for such a short time. Why would you do this for me? Ezra rose, closing the small distance between them. Because in the few months you've been here, you've brought light back into my children's lives, into my life. His voice lowered, intimate. Because when I dance with you, or watch you with my children, or see you standing up for what's right despite the cost, I feel things I thought had died with Hannah. He cupped her face gently, his calloused hands surprisingly tender against her skin. I'm falling in love with you, Winnie Winters. And I'll be damned if I'll let some Eastern bully drive you away without a fight. The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Winnie felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so unexpected it was almost painful. Ezra, she whispered, I'm afraid to hope. Then let me hope for both of us. And with that, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful yet fervent, conveying more through touch than words ever could. Winnie found herself responding with all the pent-up emotion she had denied for so long, the loneliness, the fear, but also the growing affection for this man and his children that had taken root in her heart. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We should be sensible about this, she murmured. The town will talk. A low chuckle rumbled through him. The town is already talking, Winnie, has been since the day you arrived. And that doesn't concern you, only if it troubles you. He lifted her chin so she would meet his eyes. I'm past the age of caring what others think of my personal choices. The question is, are you willing to stand beside me, face whatever comes our way together? It was a profound question, one that encompassed far more than just their feelings for each other. It was about choosing to stop running, to plant roots deep enough to withstand the storms that would inevitably come. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I am. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then we'll face Gideon Blackwell together, and whatever else life brings our way. As Winnie returned to the boarding house that evening, she felt a curious lightness despite the looming threat of Blackwell's arrival. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing her troubles alone. For the first time, she had found someone who believed in her without reservation, who was willing to stand beside her regardless of consequence. She had found, against all expectation, a place where healing was possible. A place that felt increasingly like home. The response to Ezra's inquiry came more swiftly than expected. Just a week after sending his letter to the territorial governor, a special courier arrived in Pinos Altos with a sealed packet addressed to Sheriff Granger. Ezra sent word to Winnie immediately, and she hurried to his office after dismissing her students for the day. She found him at his desk, studying several official-looking documents with an expression of grim satisfaction. The governor came through, he said without preamble as she entered. And it's worse than we thought. Winnie sank into the chair opposite his desk. Tell me, Gideon Blackwell has a history of inappropriate relationships with young women under his influence. He pushed a document toward her. 3 separate complaints from schools in Massachusetts over the past decade. all quietly resolved through family connections and financial settlements. Winnie scanned the paper, recognizing the names of 2 prestigious girls' schools where Blackwell had served on the board. "I had no idea there were others before me. There's more. A year after you left Boston, another teacher made similar accusations. She was dismissed, but the governor's contacts indicate that the Blackwell family paid a substantial sum to prevent the matter from reaching the newspapers." Hope began to build within her. So there's a pattern. Evidence that my accusations weren't unfounded. Exactly. Ezra leaned forward, his expression intense. "Winnie, with this information, we can not only defend your reputation but potentially expose Blackwell for what he is. The governor has suggested that, if we can convince even one of his victims to speak publicly, the territorial justice system would be willing to investigate formally." "That's a substantial if," Winnie pointed out. "These women have been silenced, their livelihoods threatened. Why would they risk speaking now? Because sometimes all it takes is one person with the courage to stand firm. Others find their voices when they realize they're not alone." He reached across the desk to take her hand. "You've already shown that courage, Winnie. We just need to help others find theirs." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his conviction. "What do you propose we do? First, we meet with the town council tonight if possible. I want them to have this information before Blackwell arrives. Second, I'll write to the authorities in Boston, Denver, and Santa Fe, officially requesting information about Blackwell's activities in their jurisdictions. And when he comes," because she had no doubt that Gideon would come, his pride would demand nothing less. "When he comes, he'll find that Pinos Altos stands with its schoolteacher." Ezra's jaw was set in a determined line. "And that its sheriff is prepared to see justice done, regardless of family connections or Eastern influence." The council meeting that evening was heated but ultimately productive. Harold Hollister initially dismissed the evidence as hearsay and fabrication. But when confronted with official documents bearing the territorial governor's seal, even he was forced to concede that there might be more to the situation than Blackwell had indicated in his correspondence. Miguel Rodriguez was firmly in Winnie's corner from the start. "My Juanita has learned more in 3 months with Miss Winters than in 3 years before," he declared. "If this Boston man comes to cause trouble, he will find me and my brothers ready to defend our teacher." Reverend Taylor, always the voice of moderation, suggested a balanced approach. "We should hear Mr. Blackwell out when he arrives, as Christian charity demands, but we will do so with the knowledge we now possess and judge his words accordingly." In the end, the council voted unanimously to retain Winnie as teacher regardless of Blackwell's allegations, at least until the full truth could be determined. It was more support than she had dared hope for. As June progressed, Winnie threw herself into her teaching with renewed energy. If these were to be her last weeks in Pinos Altos, she was determined to give her students everything she could in the time remaining. She organized a special exhibition of student work for the town to attend, showcasing the progress each child had made. The exhibition was a resounding success. Even the most skeptical parents couldn't deny the improvements in their children's knowledge and skills. Virginia Hollister, once surly and disengaged, proudly displayed a series of essays on territorial history that showed genuine scholarly promise. Thomas Granger's detailed maps of the surrounding region drew admiration from miners who used them to locate new claims. Even little Levi Granger, who had struggled with his letters, managed to write his name in a clear, steady hand. Ezra watched it all with obvious pride, both in his children and in Winnie. Their relationship had deepened in the weeks since his declaration, though they maintained propriety in public. Only in private moments, a shared meal after the children were asleep, a walk in the evening coolness, a stolen kiss in the shadows of the schoolhouse, did they allow themselves to fully express the growing bond between them. It was during one such evening, as they sat on the balcony of his home watching the stars emerge, that Ezra broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "July 1st is next week," he said, his hand covering hers on the railing. "If Blackwell holds to his schedule, he'll arrive on Thursday's stage." Winnie nodded, her stomach tightening at the thought of facing Gideon again. "I'm as prepared as I can be." "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," Ezra said, his voice taking on an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty. "Something I've been considering for some time now." She turned to look at him, curious about this sudden hesitation in a man usually so direct. "The children are fond of you," he began. "Very fond. Margaret looks up to you as a mentor, the boys respect you, and the twins—" He smiled softly. "Well, Lucy asked just yesterday if you could be their new mother." Winnie's breath caught. "Ezra, I know it's sudden," he continued, now speaking more rapidly as if afraid he would lose his courage. "We've known each other only a few months, and with Blackwell's arrival looming, the timing is far from ideal. But I can't help thinking that if there's anything this situation has taught me, it's that life is unpredictable and precious." He turned fully toward her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Winnie. My children love you. And if you could see yourself someday sharing our lives, becoming a family together, I would be the happiest man in the territory." The sincerity in his eyes, the simple honesty of his words, moved her deeply. This was nothing like Gideon's calculated courtship, designed to impress and control. This was a man offering his heart, his family, his future with no guarantees, no demands, just hope. "Are you proposing marriage, Sheriff Granger?" she asked, her voice gentle but seeking clarity. "I am." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring, simple but beautiful, a single pearl set in gold. "It was Hannah's, her mother's before that. She made me promise that if I ever found love again, I would pass it on. Said no woman should be expected to live in another's shadow." He held the ring out, an offering rather than a presumption. "I understand if you need time to consider, or if you want to wait until after Blackwell's visit. I just wanted you to know where my heart stands, regardless of what happens next week." Winnie looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. In Boston, she had once dreamed of a grand life, social standing, the respect that came with a prestigious marriage. But those dreams had withered in the face of reality, replaced by simpler hopes, honest work, genuine connection, the freedom to be herself without apology. Ezra Granger offered all of that and more. He offered love without conditions, support without control, partnership without dominance. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Ezra." His face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand rather than another's. "I won't pretend it will be easy," he said, drawing her close. 5 children, a sheriff's unpredictable hours, a small town with big opinions. "And a schoolteacher with a scandalous past," she added with a small smile. "Our past shapes us but doesn't define us." He cupped her face gently. "It's what we build together that matters now." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Winnie felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. Whatever Gideon Blackwell brought with him to Pinos Altos, she would face it not as a woman alone, but as one half of a partnership forged in understanding and respect. For the first time, she truly believed she could stop running. The stagecoach arrived precisely on schedule that Thursday, dust billowing around the weary horses as it rolled to a stop before the Pinos Altos hotel. Word had spread quickly about the expected visitor from Boston, and a small crowd had gathered to witness his arrival, curiosity mingling with protective concern for their schoolteacher. Winnie stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, Ezra beside her, a silent pillar of support. They had agreed that there was no point in hiding or delaying the inevitable confrontation. Better to meet Gideon directly on their terms, with the town as witness. The stage door swung open, and a man descended with the precise, controlled movements of someone accustomed to being observed. Gideon Blackwell was much as Winnie remembered him, tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that must have cost more than most miners earned in months, his dark hair showing distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. At 41, he cut a striking figure, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of polite interest as he surveyed the dusty mining town. His gaze swept the gathered townspeople and froze when it landed on Winnie. Something flashed in his eyes, triumph perhaps, or possessiveness, before his lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Winifred," he called, his cultured Boston accent striking in the frontier setting. "How delightful to find you looking so well after your adventures in the West." Beside her, Ezra tensed but remained silent, allowing her to take the lead as they had discussed. "Mr. Blackwell," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Welcome to Pinos Altos." Gideon approached, removing his hat with practiced gallantry. "My dear, you've led me on quite the chase. Boston, Denver, Santa Fe, and now this." He gestured vaguely at the surrounding buildings. "Charming little settlement." "It's home," she said simply. His gaze sharpened at that, then shifted to Ezra, noting their proximity and Ezra's protective stance. "And you must be the local lawman, Sheriff Granger," Ezra supplied, not extending his hand. "Ezra Granger. Ah, yes. You wrote claiming no knowledge of Miss Winters' whereabouts." Gideon's tone suggested this was a personal affront, a curious position given her obvious presence. "I protect those under my jurisdiction," Ezra replied evenly. "Especially when they're threatened without cause." "Threatened? My good man, I simply wish to reconnect with my former fiancée, to offer her a way back to civilization and respectability." Gideon turned his attention back to Winnie. "An offer that still stands, my dear. Your mother's health continues to deteriorate. She asks for you frequently." It was a calculated blow, targeting what Gideon knew to be her greatest vulnerability, her family ties, her concern for her mother. But Winnie was prepared. "How curious," she said. "I received a letter from my sister just yesterday. She mentioned that mother has been well enough to attend church regularly and has even resumed her charitable work at the hospital." Gideon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Catherine always did downplay your mother's suffering to spare you worry. Or perhaps you exaggerated it to manipulate me." Winnie stepped forward, no longer intimidated by this man who had once held such power over her life. "Just as you've attempted to manipulate everyone I've encountered since I left Boston. Just as you manipulated those girls who trusted you." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Gideon's composed expression faltered briefly before he recovered. "I see you continue to cling to your delusions," he said coldly. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately, rather than creating a spectacle." "There's nothing to discuss privately that can't be said here," Winnie replied. "I have no secrets from these people, Gideon. They know everything about my past, including the true reasons for my departure from Boston." "Do they indeed?" He glanced around at the townspeople, his lip curling slightly. "And they accepted the word of an outsider over that of a respected educator and civic leader? How charmingly provincial." Ezra stepped forward then, his patience clearly at an end. "Mr. Blackwell, I've received communications from the territorial governor regarding your history with young women in your care. 3 separate complaints before Miss Winters, and at least one after. All silenced through family influence and financial settlements." The color drained from Gideon's face, though he maintained his composure. Unfounded accusations, jealousy, and ambition drive people to make the most outrageous claims. 4 separate incidents, all with similar patterns, Ezra continued relentlessly. "That's not coincidence, Mr. Blackwell. That's evidence." Gideon's jaw tightened. "You overstep your authority, Sheriff. I am a citizen of Massachusetts, not your territory. You have no jurisdiction over me." "Perhaps not," agreed a new voice. Reverend Taylor stepped forward from the crowd, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by stern resolve. "But the church has always claimed jurisdiction over matters of moral conduct, and the evidence suggests yours has been found wanting." Miguel Rodriguez joined him, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "My daughter is in Miss Winters' class. If you have threatened our teacher, you have threatened our children's future." One by one, the townspeople of Pinos Altos moved to stand with Winnie and Ezra. Even Harold Hollister, after a moment's hesitation, positioned himself firmly on their side. "You may have influence in Boston, Mr. Blackwell," the merchant said gruffly, "but here in Pinos Altos, we look after our own, and Miss Winters is one of ours now." Gideon surveyed the unified front before him, calculation evident in his narrowed eyes. How touching! An entire town deceived by a woman's tears and false accusations. "Not false," Winnie said clearly, "and not just my accusations anymore. The governor has contacted your other victims, Gideon. They've begun to speak out, now that they know they're not alone. The newspapers in Boston are asking questions that even your family's money can't silence." She held up her left hand, where Ezra's ring gleamed in the sunlight. "You have no power over me anymore. I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm certainly not returning to Boston with you. My life is here now, my work, my community, my future husband and his children." For a moment, naked fury contorted Gideon's aristocratic features. Then, with visible effort, he regained control, smoothing his expression into one of condescending pity. "I see you've made your choice, Winifred. A pity. You had such potential once." He settled his hat back on his head. "I trust you'll be happy in your rustic new life." "Happier than I ever was with you," she replied honestly. Gideon's gaze shifted to Ezra. "Sheriff Granger, you've won a most convincing actress as your bride. I congratulate you. I only hope you don't discover her true nature too late, as I did." Ezra's response was calm but resolute. "Mr. Blackwell, the next stage leaves tomorrow morning at 8. I strongly suggest you be on it. Pinos Altos has no place for men who prey on the vulnerable." The implied threat was unmistakable. Gideon's mouth tightened, but he merely inclined his head in a mockery of politeness. "Until tomorrow, then." As he turned toward the hotel, the crowd parted reluctantly to let him pass, their expressions making clear that he would find no welcome in their community. When he had disappeared into the hotel, Winnie released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ezra's arm came around her shoulders, a gesture of both comfort and pride. "You did it," he murmured. "You stood your ground." "We did it," she corrected, looking around at the townspeople who had rallied to her defense. "All of us together." Miguel Rodriguez approached, his expression concerned. "You think he will cause more trouble, Miss Winters?" "I think his pride is wounded, but he's too calculating to act rashly," she replied. "He'll leave tomorrow, but his vendetta isn't over. He'll try to undermine me through other means, letters to the Territorial Education Board, perhaps, or to parents with influence." "Let him try," Harold Hollister said unexpectedly. My granddaughter has improved more in your class than in all her previous schooling combined. I may be old-fashioned about some things, Miss Winters, but I recognize quality teaching when I see it. The unexpected support from her former critic brought tears to Winnie's eyes. Thank you, Mr. Hollister. As the crowd dispersed, Reverend Taylor remained, a thoughtful expression on his face. Miss Winters, Sheriff, given recent events, perhaps you might consider moving your wedding plans forward. I could perform the ceremony as early as this Sunday after services. Ezra glanced at Winnie, leaving the decision to her. We hadn't set a date yet, but I'm amenable if Winnie is. The suggestion had merit. Marriage would strengthen her position in the community, provide additional legal protection, and most importantly formalize the family bonds that had been growing naturally over the past months. Sunday would be perfect, she agreed, though I'm afraid I don't have a proper wedding dress. Nonsense, Mrs. Sullivan declared, having lingered to hear the conversation. Between the women of this town, we'll have you outfitted like a proper bride by Sunday. It's the least we can do after you stood up to that Eastern bully. As word spread of the hastily arranged wedding, Pinos Altos transformed from a dusty mining town to a community united in celebration. Women gathered at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house with fabric, lace, and willing hands to create a wedding dress worthy of their schoolteacher. Men cleared and decorated the church, while children gathered wildflowers to adorn the simple wooden pews. True to his word, Gideon Blackwell departed on Friday's stage, his expression stony as he climbed aboard under the watchful eye of Sheriff Granger. He left without further confrontation, but his parting glance at Winnie held a promise that their dispute was far from settled. Yet even this cloud couldn't dim the joy of the days that followed. Sunday dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed designed for beginnings. The small church was filled to capacity, the entire population of Pinos Altos turning out to witness the union of their sheriff and schoolteacher. Ezra waited at the altar, unusually formal in his best suit, his children arrayed beside him, Margaret as Winnie's attendant, Thomas and Samuel standing proudly with their father, the twins clutching small baskets of flower petals they were instructed to scatter, though in practice, Levy was more interested in eating the petals than distributing them. When Winnie appeared at the church door, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the congregation. The women of Pinos Altos had outdone themselves. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with lace trim salvaged from Mrs. Rodriguez's own wedding gown, a borrowed pearl necklace complementing the pearl ring that would soon be joined by a simple gold band. But it was her expression that truly captured attention, the radiant joy of a woman who had found, against all odds, a place where she belonged, a man who respected her strength rather than seeking to diminish it, and children who had opened their hearts to her, despite the loss they had endured. As she walked toward Ezra, escorted by Miguel Rodriguez in lieu of her absent father, Winnie felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had experienced before. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself as a young woman in Boston, with its society balls and literary salons. It was something far more precious, a life built on truth, mutual respect, and genuine love. Reverend Taylor's ceremony was brief but meaningful, acknowledging both the joy of new beginnings and the challenges the couple had already overcome together. When Ezra slipped the simple gold band onto her finger to join Hannah's pearl ring, his hands were steady, his gaze unwavering. I, Ezra James Granger, take thee, Winifred Ann Winters, to be my wedded wife, he said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer in sickness and in health to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Winnie repeated the vows with equal conviction, adding a silent promise to honor the memory of the woman who had come before her, to love these children as her own, to build a life worthy of the trust Ezra had placed in her. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and Almighty God," Reverend Taylor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Ezra's kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the public setting but leaving no doubt of his feelings. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. The celebration that followed at Rodriguez's restaurant was joyous and boisterous, with music, dancing, and more food than the small town could possibly consume. The children ran wild, their usual bedtimes forgotten in the excitement. Even the most reserved members of the community joined in the festivities, recognizing that this union represented something important for Pinos Altos, the healing of a family fractured by loss, the acceptance of an outsider who had become essential to their community, the triumph of truth over malice. As evening fell and the celebration continued, Ezra found Winnie sitting with Lucy asleep in her lap, watching the dancers with contented exhaustion. "Mrs. Granger," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "May I have this dance?" "Always," she replied, carefully transferring the sleeping child to Margaret's care. "Though I fear I'm not as fresh as I was at the beginning of this very long day." "You're perfect," he said simply, leading her to the center of the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. "And you've made me the happiest man in the territory." As they moved together in perfect harmony, Winnie marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 months ago, she had arrived in Pinos Altos expecting nothing more than temporary shelter, another brief stop in her continual flight from the past. Now she was Mrs. Ezra Granger, stepmother to 5 children, respected teacher, an integral part of a community that had defended her against her most powerful enemy. "What are you thinking?" Ezra asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the things we fear most turn out to be the path to our greatest happiness," she replied. "I was so afraid of Gideon finding me, of having to face him again. But if he hadn't threatened me, would we be here now?" Ezra considered this. "Perhaps not as quickly. But I believe we would have found our way to each other regardless. Some things are simply meant to be, Winnie." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never believed in meant to be until I came here, until I met you and your children." "Speaking of the children," he said, a hint of mischief in his voice, "they've been plotting something. I'm not supposed to know, but Thomas can't keep a secret to save his life." "Oh," she looked up, curious. "What kind of something?" "Apparently they've decided that you need a proper welcome to the family. They've been making gifts drawings, a whittled figure from Thomas, some sort of sampler from Margaret. They plan to present them at breakfast tomorrow." The thought of such sweet gestures from children who had already given her their trust and affection brought tears to her eyes. "They're remarkable, Ezra. You've raised them so well despite everything." "We've been getting by," he said modestly, "but with you, I think we might actually thrive." The waltz ended, but they remained on the floor, reluctant to break their connection. Around them, the celebration continued, the community rejoicing not just in their union but in the affirmation of their shared values: loyalty, honesty, the defense of the vulnerable, the redemptive power of second chances. Later that night, as they walked from the celebration to the sheriff's home, now their home, Winnie paused to look up at the brilliant canopy of stars that only the clear mountain air of New Mexico could provide. "I used to look at the stars and feel so small, so alone," she said softly. Now I look at them and feel connected to everything, to this place, to you, to the children, to whatever the future holds for us. Ezra's arm tightened around her waist. The future holds whatever we make of it, Winnie, together. As they continued toward home, where Margaret had already taken the younger children to prepare them for bed, Winnie felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not always be smooth. Gideon Blackwell's vindictive nature ensured that challenges would come, and life in a frontier town had its inherent hardships. But for the first time in years, she was facing the future not with fear but with hope, not alone but surrounded by love. She had finally stopped running. She was home. The first year of marriage brought changes both expected and surprising to the Granger household. Winnie quickly adapted to her role as stepmother, her natural affinity with children easing the transition. The twins, young enough to accept her readily as a maternal figure, soon began calling her Ma without prompting. Thomas and Samuel, more reserved at first, gradually relaxed as they recognized that Winnie had no intention of erasing their memories of their birth mother. Margaret proved the most complex case. At 11, she was old enough to fully remember Hannah and had shouldered responsibility for her siblings for so long that relinquishing that role was difficult. There were moments of tension, of testing boundaries, but also moments of profound connection, late-night conversations about books and ideas, Margaret's gradual confidence in expressing her own ambitions, her growing trust in Winnie's guidance. By Christmas of 1876, they had achieved a genuine harmony, a family reconstructed not as a replacement for what was lost, but as something new and equally valuable. The home above the sheriff's office, once functional but sparse, became a warm haven filled with books, music, children's artwork, and the delicious aromas of Winnie's increasingly confident cooking. The school thrived under her continued leadership. With the town council's full support, she implemented a progressive curriculum that combined practical skills with academic rigor. Her students excelled in territorial examinations, bringing pride to Pinos Altos and silencing any remaining doubters. True to his vindictive nature, Gideon Blackwell made several attempts to undermine her position. Letters arrived questioning her qualifications, her character, her suitability as both teacher and stepmother. But each attack was met with unified resistance from the community. When the Territorial Education Board received a particularly vicious complaint, Miguel Rodriguez personally traveled to Santa Fe to defend our Miss Winters, that is, Mrs. Granger. By spring of 1877, the attacks had largely subsided. More significantly, a letter arrived from Winnie's sister Catherine with momentous news. Gideon Blackwell had been formally charged with improper conduct toward a student at a Boston academy. 3 women had come forward with similar stories, emboldened by Winnie's stand in distant Pinos Altos. The Blackwell family influence, while still substantial, had proved insufficient to silence all the voices raised against him. "You were right," Winnie told Ezra as they sat on their balcony after the children were asleep. The letter spread between them. "Sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm for others to find their courage." "You gave them that courage," he replied, his pride evident. "By refusing to be silenced, by building a life despite his attempts to destroy you." She leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "Our life," she corrected softly. That summer brought another change, one that filled the entire Granger family with anticipation. Winnie's increasing fatigue, her sudden aversion to certain foods, and missed monthly cycles confirmed what the town's midwife had already suspected: a baby was on the way. The children reacted to the news with varying degrees of excitement. Margaret, ever practical, immediately began planning how to rearrange bedrooms to accommodate the new arrival. Thomas wondered aloud if he might be allowed to teach the baby to fish when it was old enough. Samuel hoped for a brother who would appreciate his storytelling. The twins, still young enough to view babies as somewhat mysterious creatures, asked increasingly improbable questions about where exactly the baby was hiding inside Winnie's still flat stomach. Ezra's reaction was a complex mixture of joy and concern. The memory of Hannah's death in childbirth cast a shadow over his happiness, one that Winnie understood and addressed directly. "I'm not Hannah," she said gently one night, as they lay in bed with his hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "And this isn't then. Mrs. Rodriguez has delivered hundreds of babies safely. Dr. Mitchell visits from Silver City twice a month now. Everything will be different this time." He nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave his eyes. "I know. I just can't bear the thought of losing you, of the children losing another mother." "You won't lose me," she promised, though they both knew such promises were beyond anyone's power to guarantee. "We'll welcome this baby together and watch it grow alongside its brothers and sisters and argue about whether it has your eyes or my nose." The pregnancy progressed normally, with Winnie maintaining her teaching duties until the final weeks before her due date in February 1878. The town rallied around the family, with women bringing meals, offering childcare, and sharing wisdom both practical and superstitious about ensuring a safe delivery. On a cold, clear night in late February, Winnie's labor began. Ezra sent Thomas racing through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Rodriguez, while Margaret efficiently organized the younger children, keeping them calm despite the tension in the household. The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke over the mountains, bringing the first golden light into the bedroom, Winnie gave birth to a healthy son, his lusty cries announcing his arrival to a world ready to receive him. "He's perfect," Ezra whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his newborn son. "Absolutely perfect." Exhausted but radiant, Winnie watched her husband cradle their child with a mixture of tenderness and wonder. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed various options throughout the pregnancy, but had reached no firm decision. Now, looking at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair, Ezra said, "James, after my father, and William after yours." "James William Granger." Winnie tested the name and found it fitting. "I like it." When the older children were allowed in to meet their new brother, their reactions were everything the parents could have hoped for. Margaret approached reverently, her usual composure melting into wonder as tiny fingers wrapped around her offered finger. Thomas and Samuel stared in fascination, noting with approval that the baby had proper Granger ears. The twins, now nearly 7, climbed carefully onto the bed to examine the new arrival from all angles. "He's very red," Levy observed critically. "All babies are red at first," Margaret informed him with the confidence of newfound expertise. "He'll look more normal soon." Lucy reached out to gently touch the baby's cheek. "He's so soft, softer than anything." "That's because he's brand new," Winnie explained, her heart swelling with love for all 6 children now in her care. "Everything about him is new and perfect." As news of the birth spread through Pinos Altos, visitors arrived with gifts and congratulations. Miguel and Maria Rodriguez brought a hand-carved cradle that had held their own children. Mrs. Sullivan delivered a quilt stitched by the women of the town, each square representing a different family's good wishes. Reverend Taylor came to offer a blessing, his wife bringing a layette of delicately embroidered baby clothes. Even Harold Hollister appeared, gruffly presenting a silver cup engraved with the baby's name and birth date. "For when he's old enough to drink from it properly," he explained. Tradition in my family. The steady stream of visitors, the genuine joy of the community in welcoming this new life, reinforced what Winnie had come to know deep in her heart: Pinos Altos was home. These people were family in all the ways that mattered. As spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and warmer days, Winnie gradually resumed her teaching duties, often with baby James nestled in a sling while she conducted lessons. The arrangement raised no eyebrows in the practical mining town, where women had always worked while raising children. During the Easter break, a letter arrived from Boston that brought the final closure Winnie had been seeking. Catherine wrote that Gideon Blackwell had been convicted of improper conduct and removed from all positions of authority over young women. While his family's influence had spared him imprisonment, his reputation was irreparably damaged, his social standing destroyed. "Justice comes in many forms," Ezra observed as they discussed the news. "Sometimes it's not exactly what we imagine, but it arrives nonetheless." "I don't wish him ill," Winnie said thoughtfully, watching James sleep in his cradle. "I just wanted him stopped, wanted other young women to be safe from him, and now they are." "Because you had the courage to speak first," Ezra reminded her, drawing her close. "Never forget that." As summer approached, bringing the end of the school year and the promise of family adventures in the mountains, Winnie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years of running, of fear, of starting over again and again, all leading to this unexpected life in a mining town she had never heard of before boarding that fateful stagecoach. "Penny for your thoughts," Ezra said, finding her on the balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, James sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I was thinking about paths not taken," she replied. "If I hadn't spoken out against Gideon, if I hadn't left Boston, if I hadn't lost those other teaching positions, I wouldn't be here now, with you, with the children, with James." "Regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not one," she said firmly. "Every difficult step led me here, to you, to them, to us." He wrapped his arms around both her and the baby, creating a circle of warmth and security. "When Hannah died, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. That my job was just to see the children grown, to do the best I could for them on my own. I never imagined finding love again, certainly not with a Boston-educated schoolteacher who stood up to the entire Eastern establishment." Winnie leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his presence. "And I never imagined finding home in a mining town with a widower sheriff and his 5 children. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. 6 children now," he corrected with a smile in his voice. "And maybe more someday." She turned in his arms to face him, baby James still sleeping peacefully between them. "Definitely more someday. This family has room to grow." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they remained on the balcony, watching their town settle into evening routines, lamps being lit in windows, miners returning from their claims, the saloon piano beginning its nightly serenade. Inside their home, the older children were completing their assigned tasks with the usual mix of cooperation and complaint, creating the comforting soundtrack of family life. "I love you, Winnie Granger," Ezra said simply. "And I love you, Sheriff Granger," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." In that moment, standing in the gathering darkness with the man she loved and the baby they had created together, Winnie knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for all along: not just a place to hide, not just a job to sustain her, but a true home, a family forged from both birth and choice, and the deep healing that comes from being loved exactly as you are. The woman everyone had abandoned had finally found where she belonged, and the cowboy with 5 children had found the missing piece of his heart. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a family united not by the absence of wounds, but by the shared journey toward healing. Under the vast New Mexico sky, with mountains standing sentinel around their town, they faced the future not with fear but with hope, not alone but together, stronger for having found each other against all odds in the wild, unforgiving, beautiful West.